Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Inside the Pickle Jar. This is a podcast where we're going to explore the beautifully wired, we'll call it, sometimes chaotic, ever fascinating world of neurodivergent brains. If this is the first time you've ever listened to one of my episodes, I'm your host, Tanya. I'm a PCC certified coach, a creative educator, an ultra runner, and I'm your guide through this briny, crunchy, wonderful, complex landscape of how our minds actually work. Today, we're going to talk about something that many neurodivergent folks carry shame about, including my own clients, and that's being late. It's not because we don't care, and it's not because we're irresponsible, but it's because our brains process time and urgency and transitions differently. And this episode is your permission slip to drop the shame and pick up some science. So, this is why being late isn't a character flaw. We're going to start with the truth. Chronic lateness is not a moral failing. It's a neurological pattern. So for autistic, ADHD, and ADHD brains, lateness often comes from time blindness, which is the difficulty in sensing the passage of time, executive function lag, which is trouble shifting from one task to another, hyperfocus, losing track of everything except the thing in front of you, working memory limitations, like forgetting your steps or underestimating transitions, and then emotional regulation challenges, which is the avoidance when you're overwhelmed. These are brain-based differences, not personality defects. So when you understand the why, the shame starts to loosen its grip just a little bit. So here's a neuroscience of time blindness. And some of these are references back to a couple of episodes I did with Dr. Lisa Regal. Fascinating person. Go back and listen to her episodes. She does a great breakdown of cognitive thinking in an easy way to understand. I'm going to reuse some of her metaphors. So we're going to talk about brain science. The prefrontal cortex. This is the CEO of the brain. It's responsible for planning and prioritizing, sequencing, and estimating time. In ADHD and ADHD brains, this region develops differently and activates less consistently. This means time feels abstract. Deadlines feel distant until they're not. 5 minutes and 40 minutes can feel identical. I don't know how many of you can relate to waiting until the last minute and then you do better when you're under the gun and you have all that pressure, but it's this concept of deadlines are really far away until they aren't anymore. So then there's an issue with dopamine regulation, and dopamine fuels motivation, and it also fuels task initiation, and then the internal sense of urgency. And neurodivergent brains often have lower baseline dopamine, which means hard tasks feel impossible to start, and then boring tasks feel physically painful. And then urgency only kicks in when the deadline is immediate. This is why many of us live in now and then not now. Then there's hyperfocus and flow states. When dopamine finally does hit, we can drop into deep focus, the kind where hours disappear. This is a superpower until you're supposed to be somewhere in 20 minutes. I cannot tell you how many times this has happened to me. I'm really digging what I'm doing, and I'm so intense. It's like I just want 5 more minutes, and I have to set timers for meetings to make sure I don't miss them, because if I get in flow, I'll be halfway into a meeting time start and like, it's over. Then there's this interoception. And interoception is your ability to sense internal cues like hunger, thirst, bathroom needs, and yes, time to transition. Many neurodivergent folks have muted interoception, which means you don't feel the wrap-up signal, and you don't notice time passing, and you don't feel the urgency until it's too late. And this is not laziness, it's wiring. So, executive function and why transitions are really hard. Executive function is the brain's management system. And when it's glitchy, transitions become the boss level of daily life. Executive functions, they challenge that. They're the challenges that impact punctuality. It's all about executive function. Things like task initiation, like, getting things started takes more energy. And then there's task switching, which is shifting from one activity to another, and it's mentally expensive. Working memory is forgetting steps like grab keys, water, laptop. I can't tell you how many lists I have just to make sure I get out the door with everything. Like, I have to build going into just regular events. Then there's planning and sequencing, which is underestimating how long things take. This is always a pitfall for me as well. And then there's inhibition, which is the difficulty in stopping something enjoyable or urgent. If you've ever said, I'll leave in 5 minutes, and then looked up and it's been 45, that's executive function, not character. So here's some of the emotional layer, the whole shame, masking, and internalized failure. We're going to talk about, because some of this is really difficult and maybe even triggering, but there's this emotional side. Because lateness carries a heavy social cost. A lot of neurodivergent adults grew up hearing, "You're so irresponsible. Why can't you just be on time? You don't respect other people's time. If you're not early, you're late." I grew up in a household like that. So over time, this becomes internalized shame. But here's the truth. You can care deeply and still struggle with time. You can be brilliant and still miss deadlines. You can be committed and still run late. When we remove shame, we create space for solutions. So, here are some practical strategies that actually work for neurodivergent brains. And these aren't just set a reminder tips, okay, which I do a lot of those, and you probably already do. So you don't need to hear more about, just set your alarm, use a Post-it note. These are actually strategies designed for the way neurodivergent brains operate. So the first thing you need to do is externalize time. Time is invisible for us. You need to make it visible. You need visual timers, you need countdown clocks, you need alarms with labels, and time to transition cues. I do set alarms for myself all the time on my phone. They're better than reminders, and I usually set a timer 5 minutes before I need to be at a meeting or 15 minutes before I need to leave to go somewhere. And then I will sometimes label it because I might not remember. But it does help, like if you can set a visual timer, or even if you get a sand timer. Those are just harder to adjust if you need a variable amount. So this leads into number 2. Build transition buffers. If something takes 20 minutes, plan for 40. Not because you're bad at estimating, but because your brain needs runway. And you can use body doubling for transitions. Have someone text you, time to wrap up. Or use virtual co-working rooms. Those tend to work really well. There are also ways to set up text messages on your phone to text you yourself. That might help. And then pre-pack your life. So reduce the number of steps between I need to leave and I'm out the door. So you need a go bag. I have one. Most of my stuff is set up ahead of time. If I am smart, I'm always smart, but if I plan well, I will pack everything up the night before, like my computer and everything, because that invariably takes me longer to pack up my computer bag to go to work than I expected. A charging station is really helpful. and a launch pad by the door. Always place your stuff in the same place so that you know that you need to grab. So like if you're prepping things, you always remember to grab them because they're in the same place. And like when I pack a lunch, if it's got something in it that needs to stay refrigerated, I'll leave out a cue, like a water bottle that will remind me, like, why is this water bottle here? Oh, I'm supposed to grab my lunch. You can put a Post-it note if you want to, but sometimes those get overlooked. So emotional regulation should come first. When you're overwhelmed, you won't transition. So try a 30-second grounding. Be sure you plan that in. And it's 30 seconds. It's just maybe some deep breathing, 1 or 2 box breaths where you breathe in for 4 and you hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold for 4. Just to reset before you go out the door. Maybe a sensory reset, where maybe you close your eyes. A micro break before shifting tasks sometimes help. I've heard the suggestion that you should take breaks in between your tasks, so program those in so that when you, instead of multitasking, monotask, take a break. Monotask, take a break. It's easier, especially when you feel sensory overload. And then there's, you can use a lot of interest-based motivation. You could pair boring tasks with something stimulating, whether it's music, movement, erase the timer game. It isn't bribery, it's dopamine engineering. So sometimes if I've got something really boring for work that I need to do, I call it spinach work, I might play MASH or some other, like Cheers, some other series that I've watched dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And I don't really have to watch it to understand what's going on. I can hear it and pick up on the cues, but it keeps what I call my 12-year-old brain engaged so that my brain doesn't wander off while my adult brain does the task I'm supposed to be doing. I do occasionally try to do a race the timer game when it comes to getting ready. I have to say, getting ready in the morning, showering, doing all those things is one of the reasons. I don't know if you've noticed, I've cut my hair. Now my hair process takes so much less time. That is a big time save and a big win for me. But I do try to do that, but it just seems to take so long. And I easily get distracted in getting ready. And then I go to the one more thing. So I just want to say, if you've spent your life apologizing for being late, I want you to hear this. You are not broken. You are not irresponsible. You are not inconsiderate. You are navigating a world built for brains that operate differently than yours. Understanding the neuroscience behind lateness isn't about making excuses. It's about reclaiming your dignity, your self-trust, and your ability to design a life that works with your wiring and not against it. I just recently did an episode for my show, Inside the Pickle Jar, a little bit different than the podcast, where we cover very similar topics but in a very different way. And Inside the Pickle Jar show, I use characters to talk about some of these very things. And if you go and look for, on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, you can look for my discussions about Eleanor and Lily. And they are my time, focus, and executive function little characters on the show. And I invite you to go find it on YouTube. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being curious and for being brave enough to explore the inner workings of your mind. This is Inside the Pickle Jar. I'm Tanya, and I'll see you in the next episode. Big briny hugs, and please share and subscribe and let others know about this show. Please stay tuned for an excerpt from Healthy Gamers Time Blindness episode. They have some really great suggestions on how to tackle some of the issues that we face being neurodivergent. They go by Dr. T and Dr. K, and I will leave a link to the full video in the show notes. Please listen.
It's noon on a Monday, and you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, man, I have homework. And your brain is like, yeah, it can be you at 1 p.m. on Monday, 1 hour from now, you could be done with that task. And then you're like, damn, this is the last piece of homework I have for the next 3 days. I could relax for the next 3 days if I just sit down and do 1 hour of work right now. But if your brain is like, this is going to take 3 days, this piece of homework has suddenly become a dissertation. So today we're going to talk about time blindness in ADHD. As a psychiatrist, this is the thing that causes the most damage to my patients' lives that they are unaware of as a problem with ADHD. So what do I mean by that? So in ADHD, like, we're all aware that there are attentional problems, right? I have difficulty concentrating. I get distracted easily. We know that there are problems with things like emotional regulation. So it's hard to regulate my emotions. I sort of get angry easily, or I get frustrated very easily. So we're aware of some of these deficits in ADHD. But time blindness is one of these deficits that we don't sort of think about quite as much, even though it has profound impacts on our life. So I've seen time blindness lead to things like divorce. So these are spouses who are chronically late to things, who can't be counted on to follow through and stick with plans. I've also seen graduate students that I've worked with who will get sort of threatened or even kicked out of programs because they can't meet deadlines. So let's take something simple like procrastination. So we all know that people with ADHD procrastinate. It's a part of the disease, right? It's a part of this executive function deficit where we have difficulty planning and executing tasks. So if I were to ask you, if you've got ADHD, how long would it take you to do your homework? You'd say something like, I have no way of knowing, because it could take 30 minutes or it could take 3 days, because that's our experience with ADHD. Our brain has no way to calculate how much time a task will take. Now, we make a fundamental mistake here, which is that we think that the reason we can't calculate it is because it's so inconsistent, but that's technically not true. There's actually an impairment in our brain's ability to estimate time. Now, if your brain cannot estimate time properly, right? So that's what, if I ask you, how long will it take you to do your homework? You'll be like, I have no way of knowing. That is not a problem of procrastination or deficit of attention or things like that. That is literally, if I ask a neurotypical person, how long will it take you to do task X? Their brain is processing a bunch of information that allows them to produce an estimate. Oh, you need this paper written? I can get it done in a week. Whereas if our brain lacks the capacity to estimate time, then how on earth are we supposed to plan, right? So if I have no idea whether this piece of homework will take 30 minutes or 3 days, how am I supposed to make a plan for the week? How am I supposed to make a plan for a semester? How am I supposed to plan for a vacation if I have no idea how long things will take? So interesting. So when you engage in your senses with ADHD, you are harnessing this hypersensitive circuit. It's a potent circuit. It's not hypersensitive. It is potent. That's the way that I want you to think about it. This means that especially with time perception, we need to use our senses. So what I strongly recommend for people who do this is to, first of all, literally measure and track and write down how much time it takes you to do everything. You cannot track it in your head. Now, this is important to understand. This is why you have to write it and record it. See, when I think, here's my brain. And when I think, that happens over here. These are the cortices. Here is my hippocampus. Okay. So when I think, that happens over here, and my hippocampus is over here. These two are pretty far apart. Thinking and learning and memory don't connect very clearly. I know this sounds kind of weird, but I know it sounds crazy. Just think about it for a second, right? I cannot think through my problems and suddenly my behavior changes. I don't necessarily learn from my mistakes by thinking through them. If anything, the hippocampus feeds our cortices, right? So the things that I've learned will show up in my thoughts, but the things that I think won't always become part of my memory. This is why if you have a great idea for a video game or a novel or a hilarious joke, if you don't write it down, you will forget it. Not all of your thoughts are put down into memory. In fact, your brain sort of uses thinking as a way of getting rid of stuff, like thinking is a way of processing stuff. But what is in your memory will show up in your thoughts. What is in your thoughts doesn't always get put into your memory. Now, what does that have to do with ADHD? Over here, we have the thalamus. Now, the thalamus is our sensory gateway to the brain. So our eyes go into the thalamus, our ears go into the thalamus, our olfactory senses go into the thalamus, all of these things go into the thalamus. And then the thalamus connects very, very, very tightly to the hippocampus. So the first time that you're seeing a volcano, are you remembering it? Do you have to try hard to remember it? Of course not. The first time that you taste something, that's absolutely delicious, do you have to try hard to remember it? Absolutely not. So our brain is literally anatomically wired so that our sensory portions and our memory are very closely linked together. Very, very tightly connected. So if we want to learn and we have ADHD, we don't want to use our thoughts. We want to use our senses. So this is why the first thing that I recommend people do is get a clock, okay? And we're going to do a couple of things with a clock. The first thing that we're going to do is measure ourselves. So anytime you do a task, okay, you want to literally measure how long it takes and then put it into an Excel spreadsheet or put it into a notebook or something like that, okay? Now, you all may have some technical questions of, okay, when do I start the measurement? So what I would say is if you want to try to do homework, right? So literally grab all the stuff and you can procrastinate. Don't worry about procrastination. Sit down and start the clock. And then do a real world assessment of when is the homework done. So over the course of 4 hours, I get very little done. Or in the middle, you sit down and actually start doing some work. And so you set a second timer. And you set a second timer, and for 15 minutes I'm working. How much did I get done? So it'll be a little bit dynamic. When I work with people, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. One thing that I find is that using a calendar for big blocks of time and an actual timer when you sit down is very, very helpful for small blocks of time. So as we take measurements, what we're going to do is we're going to be feeding our senses. And this is the beautiful thing. When you feed your senses, your brain is going to learn on its own. So the problem here is that your brain doesn't have access to this internal clock from your suprachiasmatic nucleus. And so the suprachiasmatic nucleus is connecting to your frontal lobes. Let's say here's our hypothalamus somewhere over here. Here's our frontal lobes. These guys are trying to plan a day. This is our clock. Now, this guy normally talks to the frontal lobes, and it gives it information. It's not about right or wrong. It automatically is giving information. The more information you feed to your frontal lobes, the easier it is to plan. Does that make sense? The more data the frontal lobes have, the easier it is to make plans. So if I make 5 measurements and then over time I spend a year practicing homework and then 5 years doing homework and then 10 years doing homework, then I'll figure out how long it takes for me to do homework. Does that make sense? The more information we give our frontal lobes, the better they perform. Now, here's the problem in ADHD. We don't have this. So the frontal lobes are trying to plan without any info. So what we want to do is we want to take this bad boy, the thalamus, and we're going to use this to feed the frontal lobes. Doesn't matter. It can be low quality information. The more info you give it, the frontal lobes will do their job. They will start to make estimates. They will correct their estimates. So it'll make an estimate. You sit down tomorrow, you try to do it, turns out that it's off. You're off, you underestimated by 50%. The next day, you overestimate by 50%. The next day, you underestimate by 25%. The next day, you overestimate by 25%. So as long as you continue feeding the thalamus, right, again and again and again, your estimates will improve over time. And this is what neurotypical people do on their own because the suprachiasmatic nucleus is doing it for them. They don't need this external scaffolding, okay? Now, the second thing that we need to talk about, so remember we said that a healthy relationship with time involves some amount of internal clock and some amount of external clock. So if I'm neurotypical, my brain can keep track of some things and I need to use an alarm some. If you've got ADHD, your internal clock is going to be impaired, but your sensory sensitivity is going to be higher. So we're going to have to rely on external time signals, external trackers of time to help us out. So this is where calendars, reminders, I use alarms all the time. Even when I'm procrastinating, I'll use an alarm. So I have a 20-minute timer set on my phone. That's my procrastination timer. So I'll set it if I want to play a video game for 20 more minutes. Let's say I'm playing Elden Ring. So what I'll do is I'll set a 20-minute timer and I'll be okay, I should start working now, but I'm going to set a 20-minute timer. And then 20 minutes rolls around. I'm okay, that's enough. Because really think about it. When you're like procrastinating, you don't want to start work. But when you really look back, it has been my experience, when you look back at the 20 minutes that you wasted, you're like, was this really worth it to waste this time? And the answer is always no. The problem is that you don't have that step because you don't have that external anchor that's pulling you in and like actually helping you realize what the hell you're doing. So we want to create an external scaffold of reminders, timers, calendars, etc. So those are the two things that we're going to focus on. And now I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Thorderson because she's going to give you all some awesome tips that she's taught a bunch of people who have time blindness, ADHD, and this is what really works for like larger populations in terms of skills building.
Dr. K's idea of timing yourself is one of my favorite tips to better learn how to manage your time. You can do this by timing yourself for the whole project, or you can do it by timing yourself in increments. Both strategies are helpful because it's really useful to know how long is it really going to take me to get something done. With ADHD, we look at tasks and we're like, oh my God, it's going to be so much work. And we overestimate how much effort and time it's going to take us, which ends up leading to lots of procrastination. I don't know how many things I've had to do on my to-do list. I'm like, oh, it's going to take forever. It's going to take forever. I put it off for months. And then I get to it and it takes me 10 minutes. Do I learn from that? Not often. And these strategies can help, right? Because then instead of looking at that and being like, oh my God, it's going to take hours, I can look at a task and say, hey, I don't like that task, and it's only going to take me 15 minutes if I can just get it done. On the flip side, for tasks that do take longer periods of time, it can be really helpful to set smaller increments. Any 2-hour task is going to be, at least in my opinion, a little bit overwhelming to get started with. And so it's helpful for me to look at, okay, what can I get done in 10 minutes of time? So that way it's easier for me to approach because I can think, oh, this is all that I need to do. Or you can think about, well, I only have 10 minutes right now, and 10 minutes is still a meaningful amount of productivity to be able to be kind of like working away at that bigger picture. Learning how much time things takes us is much easier because when we think about what we need to get done, instead of thinking, oh yeah, that's fast, or oh, that's going to take forever, I can think concretely about the amount of time. So instead of relying on my sometimes impaired internal clock, I'm relying on my logic and learning about the facts about how much time things are going to take me. Part of having ADHD is getting distracted. You can map out routines or tasks to the exact number of minutes that it's going to take you, and still almost every time blow that time. And you think to yourself over and over, how is it that this took me an hour and a half when I knew it was supposed to take me an hour? And the reason for that is we didn't factor in any cushions for distractions. So let's think about a specific routine, right? Morning routines, we all do it. We all have to get up, get ready, and get on with our days. We know exactly what we need to do every morning. It's a pretty predictable experience. And so you can break down that routine into really specific increments of time. It takes me how many minutes to get dressed, brush my teeth, wash my face, use the restroom, right? I love my electric toothbrush because it times it for me. I don't have to think about it. I just know it takes 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, right? I know exactly how many active minutes a morning routine takes me. However, every morning, without fail, I manage to get distracted too. So I'm doing something and, oh, look, a text message. Or I'm brushing my teeth and wait a second, do I need to be doing something with my eyebrow? So we need those cushions to account for the fact that we can reliably expect ourselves to be distracted. So if you are somebody who gets mildly distracted or slightly off task, you might factor in like 5-10 extra minutes of cushion into that morning routine. If you're someone who is real slow moving in the morning, or someone who is really highly distracted or has a very distractible environment in the morning, you might build in more like 15 to 20 minutes.
I hope you enjoyed that excerpt. Please go visit and see their full video on YouTube. I think you'll enjoy it immensely. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and share. And until next time, big briny hugs.